That's his head. Oh, I just can't see that loop. Oh well. Okay, so starting off day 2. Everybody here is now a seasoned veteran, settling in, feeling the momentum, coming back to the practice after a whole day. And so on day 2 of a retreat, you start to notice, the aches and pains and minor annoyances. And this is actually a really ripe time for insight, because the reason you didn't notice those before is that when we're not doing a lot of formal practice, we're adjusting constantly to avoid dukkha. We're getting up, we're sitting down, we're going for a walk, we're going home and laying down on the couch, we're turning something on, we're turning something off, all with careful attempts to avoid any experience of the unpleasant. And with a meditation practice, we're being encouraged to find a way to be okay with that, specifically because it sets us free. A lot of energy goes into trying to avoid dukkha. But when we turn it around and we see dukkha as, well, it's as normal as air. It's as normal as the sun coming up in the morning. And dukkha is just part of our lives. Well, then we don't need to expend any energy. We can just let it be there. And some of the aches and pains now after a day of formal practice will be starting to announce themselves. And those were things that you would sometimes spend hours of contortions and activities to avoid. That particular ache in your hip, that particular spinning in the mind. But now we're just seeing it, and it's like, okay, there it is. That's your worst case scenario. You've spent years avoiding that thing. Is it really that bad? And we get to look at it. In day 4 and 5 of a retreat, some of these things will be screaming, yes, we're that bad. And we'll have to change our posture a little, or we'll have to develop some sort of rhythm, to kind of work with it. Maybe we have a digestive problem, or maybe a back pain. This is the process. So at this stage of the game, we shouldn't be assuming, unless there's something that we've investigated time and time again, and we know that, okay, this will get to be a real problem, and we start working with it right now. We don't just endure it. But if it's just something that's just popping up into our awareness, we can wait and watch and see what it's like. And so it's not the most attractive advertisement. Come sit down on your cushion and be mindful of the pains that arise. But they have a saying in the Chinese tradition, bitter practice, sweet mind. And hopefully now we're also seeing the counterpoint of that, because we haven't been adjusting, haven't been avoiding. The mind is becoming stronger, brighter, calmer. It might not be a huge difference, but there is more energy there. In day 1 of a retreat, we tend to work with just getting our hands on the reins, getting some sense of control or boundary for our mind, because it's been running wild to some extent. We have a strong daily practice, then it won't be too hard to get back in control, but we'll be setting new expectations and kind of watching the mind have to adjust. And that's sense restraint. And again, sense restraint isn't a matter of avoiding pleasant things, avoiding unpleasant things. The Buddha does talk about the drawbacks of sensuality, the dangers of sensuality, but never in the context of sense restraint. Sense restraint is having our awareness at the sense doors, having our hands on the reins of the mind so that we can pull back if we get close to something that's going to send us spinning. For me, this experience, and maybe you've also been getting this over the last day, is sort of like my mind is still spinning a bit, but it's not leaving the confines of the body. Like if I'm on a path in the woods, then my mind is spinning on a path in the woods. And you wouldn't really call that mindfulness yet, because it's still spinning, it's still thinking about all kinds of things. But it's moving in the right direction. And the next step is to kind of guide it towards an awareness of what we're actually doing. And that's something a bit more involved. That's mindfulness and clear comprehension, a Pali phrase called sati sampajanya. And this is where we're very actively moving towards those techniques and processes that we actually use in the meditation exercise and the exercise of developing samadhi. Because we need to get the mind interested in what's actually going on. To do that, we have to be aware of what's actually going on. And this is much more involved. It can't be done just walking off the street and sitting down and suddenly being aware. We need to lead into it. We need to slow our activities down until we can start to pick up on them and notice them and stay with them. And this is a very natural progression that we'll start to have that experience now. It's like Bhante Sumino was saying yesterday. This is sort of that moment, that transition, when you can start to notice the sensation in your feet. It's a totally neutral, kind of not spectacular sensation. But your mind doesn't go anywhere else. It doesn't need spectacular anymore. And when you can actually stay with an experience, even a mundane experience, like knowing what your feet are doing, then that becomes spectacular in a way. Because this is what the mind really wants. It wants to be trained, it wants to be tamed, it wants to be controlled, because that's the most peaceful state, that's the most free state, where there's no boundaries needed, because there's no straying. The meditation teacher Ajahn Brahm Wangso had a way of describing the process of developing samadhi that really stuck with me. And he talks about the doer and the beer. As we're sitting down for meditation, we'll notice there's a part of our mind that's all about doing. And specifically, it's doing things that our body is not doing. And this is normal, and we need this in everyday life. So even though we're sitting in the car, for instance, our mind is going off to the store and thinking about what it needs to buy. Why? Because, it's planning. Or we're in a social context, and people are saying things to us, and our mind is going back into the past, revisiting conversations with those people to try to get context. What is it they mean? What is it they're referring to? What do they usually mean when they're talking in this way, using that tone? It's very normal for our mind to do this, but when we're sitting down for meditation, we're actively trying to engage with the present moment, which means the doer has to become quiet. In actuality, it has to cease to exist. But that's okay. It's not about killing the doer, because it's just a process. And when the process has run itself out, when it's not needed, it's just not there. And we pacify the doing part of the mind by becoming mindful of what our body is actually doing, of getting the mind back involved with just what's happening right now. And this becomes a feeling of switching into an observation mode. But it's not a separated observation mode, because there's also the beer, the part of our mind that's trying to reframe things and contextualize things and name things. And that keeps us separated from mindfulness, separated from what's actually going on, because it's what's going on plus concepts. So noticing this, many times we'll say, oh, I'm sitting here on a cushion, and then look at the definition. What did I just tell myself I was doing? And then look at the actual experience. And how do the two differ? When the doer and the beer have gone quiet, and the mind is not separated from the body at all. There's only one thing going on now. And that's mindfulness and clear comprehension. Mindfulness of the body as it is. Mindfulness of the context of who we are and what we're doing, and what time it is and where we are, to the extent that that's useful. And the calmer we get on the cushion, the less we need to engage even with that much data. And it can just be a body. It can just be sensations arising and ceasing. Even the sense bases themselves won't be turned off, but we'll just stop attending to them. They'll be like windows in a room that we know we can look out at any moment, but we also know that we don't have to. So we can just stay with the experience we're having. Stay with the mental process. So these are the things we can work on and we can develop. And it's a step-by-step process. At any point where our mind is racing out, then we can work on sense restraint, on just being really, really careful, really clear at the sense bases, staying in the context, in the area of her body. But when the mind is not racing out, then turning it to paying attention, to being aware, the actual context, the actual activity, what's actually going on right here and right now. And letting this power of the mind develop, this brightness develop, freeing up even more energy into the mind.